A heavy silence gripped the courtroom, thick with unspoken tension. A black woman, dressed in a flawless black suit, stepped inside with the poise of someone who knew this room owed her respect. But prejudice wore a uniform that day. A police officer, blinded by bias, blocked her path. He seized her FBI badge with a sneer, accused her of forgery, and before the stunned crowd could blink, he had her wrists bound in cold steel. What didn't he know? His world would crumble under the relentless weight of truth in exactly 7 minutes. This is the story of Aaliyah Monroe, a federal agent who turned humiliation into a roaring triumph. Buckle up, because what you're about to witness will leave you breathless. This is Aura Tales, where true courage breaks every chain. Subscribe for more stories that inspire. It was a heavy Thursday morning in the historic courthouse of St. Louis. The marble walls seemed to carry the weight of decades of injustice. Aaliyah Monroe, 37, entered courtroom 4B, each step deliberate, her black suit stitched with precision. In her hand, a brown leather briefcase gripped something that could ignite an entire system. A USB drive filled with recordings, testimonies, and footage exposing deep-seated police corruption. She wasn't here just to testify. She was the firestorm about to consume hidden lies. Aaliyah was no stranger to resilience. Raised in Birmingham, Alabama, she learned about silent strength, not in schools but on worn sidewalks and crowded kitchens. Her mother, a nurse mother, worked double shifts, while her father vanished before she turned 12. By 15, Aaliyah knew the rules by heart. Stay silent, stay sharp, keep your ID in plain sight. This resilience carried her not through privilege, but through iron grit, into the ranks of the FBI where few like her ever made it. But as she approached the courthouse checkpoint that morning, reality struck. Officer Brent Halverson, a white man with 20 years on the force and prejudice woven into his badge, stopped her cold. Her FBI credentials held out plainly, ignored. "That's fake," Halverson growled, stepping into her path. "You don't belong here." Without a second thought, without a single verification, he twisted her arm cruelly and snapped cold cuffs around her wrists. The sharp click echoed across the marble halls. The judge, lawyers, and even reporters fell into stunned silence. No one moved. No one stopped it. Face pressed against the wood, rage hotter than fear coursed through Aaliyah. She wasn't just a witness today. She was the lead investigator in a probe that implicated Halverson himself. The briefcase is now on the floor. It carried the very evidence that would bring him down. "Where'd you steal this badge from?" Halverson sneered, waving her credentials mockingly. A few officers chuckled. The rest of the room, however, fell into a tense, electrified stillness. On her knees, Aaliyah whispered one promise. "You just made the biggest mistake of your life." Halverson tightened the cuffs smugly, thinking he'd crushed her spirit. He had no idea he'd just triggered his own downfall. In a dim holding room, Aaliyah sat alone. The red welts on her wrists throbbed. A young officer handed her a cup of water, stammering an apology she didn't acknowledge. She didn't want pity. She wanted precision. This wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a window into a rotten system. Badge or no badge, power or no power, she had been reduced to a suspect. In seconds, outside the courthouse buzzed like a hive. Footage of the incident was already leaking onto social media. Whispers filled the halls. The judge delayed proceedings, but the reason was clear. The woman meant to expose corruption had just been silenced, visibly, violently, in front of them. All. But Aaliyah wasn't finished. After being released, she returned to the courtroom, head unbowed. Phones discreetly filmed her every move. The moment she took the stand, her voice cleaved through the tension like a sword. "For the past 7 months," she declared, projecting authority, "I have led an undercover operation into systemic misconduct within the St. Louis Police Department." She produced the USB, connecting it to the courtroom projector. Then she played, The first recording, Halverson's unmistakable voice ordering falsified charges against a young black man. In the gallery, the boy's mother covered her mouth, tears streaming silently down her face. "I have 12 more recordings," Aaliyah continued, "all tied to racially motivated detentions, all dismissed for lack of evidence." A pattern was undeniable. A malice unmasked. Halverson squirmed at the defense table, whispering furiously to his lawyer. Gone was the smirking cop from an hour ago. When the prosecutor asked if she could identify an officer who had attempted to intimidate her 3 weeks prior, Aaliyah didn't blink. "Officer Brent Halverson," she stated, voice razor sharp. The judge's face stiffened. "And to confirm, this is the same officer involved in today's altercation?" "Yes, Your Honor," Aaliyah affirmed. "I request that my ongoing testimony be protected under federal privilege for my safety." The judge granted her request. In that moment, Halverson wasn't a figure of law anymore. He was Exhibit A. The air shifted. The courthouse realized today wasn't about protecting old powers. Today was about reckoning. This is Aura Tales, where justice speaks louder than hate. Subscribe to be part of the change. The next day, Aaliyah returned, clad again in black, her briefcase heavy with justice. But now, the world was watching. Cameras clogged the entrances. Reporters shouted her name. Halverson stumbled, in, pale, desperate, gum-chewing nervously. His swagger was dust. The judge opened with a bombshell. A federal motion had been filed by Aaliyah herself, requesting immediate disciplinary action and release of further evidence. "This," Aaliyah said, producing a second USB marked with red tape, "includes testimony from a confidential informant." The recordings captured Halverson instructing subordinates to fabricate evidence and intimidate witnesses. "This is a lie," Halverson roared. "A setup." But Aaliyah stood firm. "Would you like to explain," she asked calmly, "what you meant when you said, 'I'm untouchable. I own the system'?" She pressed play. The room filled with Halverson's drunken boasts, his arrogance preserved forever in digital ink. She didn't stop there. A video played. Halverson handing off falsified documents in a shadowy parking lot, his face frozen on the projector, caught red-handed. "Your Honor," Aaliyah stated, her voice unshakable, "we request immediate arrest for obstruction of justice and conspiracy against a federal investigation." The judge, face grim, turned to the bailiffs. "Sheriff, take Officer Brent Halverson into custody," the courtroom gasped. Halverson sputtered, "You're gonna believe her?" But no one moved to defend him. The cuffs clicked around his wrists, the irony burning into the very bones of the room. Aaliyah leaned in close enough for him to hear. "You didn't think I'd get the last word, did you?" But her fight wasn't over. With her attorney Natalie and an honest officer, Daniel Ruiz, Aaliyah unearthed a deeper ring of corruption. They reopened a case, a suicide, that stank of murder. They exposed an epidemic stretching beyond St. Louis, changing policies. Nationwide, Ruiz testified, igniting reforms. Natalie became a courtroom titan. Halverson, convicted, disgraced, forgotten by the system he once thought he controlled. Aaliyah rose higher within the FBI, training a new generation determined to rewrite the rules. But the cost lingered. Sleepless nights, death threats, scars unseen, one. Afternoon, back home in Birmingham, Aaliyah sat at her mother's kitchen table, tracing a worn photo of her father. Tears glistened in her mother's eyes. "He'd be so proud of you," she whispered. Aaliyah smiled faintly, the weight on her chest lifting for the first time in years. This isn't just Aaliyah's story. It's a question for all of us. When the system tries to silence you, will you raise your voice anyway? Will you stand firm even when it costs you everything? Justice isn't glamorous. It's hard. It's lonely. It's the choice to do what's right over and over again. Aaliyah Monroe proved that one voice can light up the darkness. Now it's your turn. Tell us in the comments, what would you have done in Aaliyah's place? How does her courage inspire you today? Subscribe for more stories that transform pain into power. This is Aura Tales, where resilience rewrites history.